Natalka Cmoc has a BA in Physical Anthropology from the University of Toronto, a Master of Science in Forensic Anthropology from the University of Toronto, and was appointed Canada's ambassador to Ukraine in August 2023. She completed field research in Ukraine and Russia, including implementing Canadian technical assistance projects in Ukraine in the 1990s. Ambassador Natalka worked with EKOS Research Associates in Public Policy before joining the federal government in 2007, first at Health Canada and then at the Canadian International Development Agency. Ambassador Natalka served as a counselor for technical cooperation at the Embassy of Canada to Ukraine from 2011 to 2013, working on democracy and human rights programming. Ambassador Natalka then joined Global Affairs Canada's Stabilization and Reconstruction Task Force, where she was responsible for establishing the first security programming in Ukraine following Russia's 2014 invasion, which included supporting Operation Unifer's launch. In 2015, she moved to the Department of National Defence as Director in the Infrastructure and Environment Branch, and in 2017 to Indigenous Services Canada as Senior Director of First Nations Housing and Infrastructure. In 2020, she became Director General in the Science and Parliamentary Infrastructure Branch at Public Services and Procurement Canada, where she was responsible for complex infrastructure policy related to the modernization of the parliamentary precinct and to the Laboratories Canada strategy. Please welcome Natalka Cmoc.
What would you want to share about what's it been like since you've taken your post and your position and working in a country that's at war, in an active war zone?
That's just a small question,
Yeah.
An icebreaker.
Icebreaker.
So I just also want to do a shout out to our colleague Larissa Galadza. So I have been absolutely blessed by having the support of both Larissa and Roman. So I mean, it's like I get to start at a running start because both of them have been extremely supportive of me. So I think that just everyone should know that because I feel like it's like the same team and we're just continuing and growing from that. But both of them have always been available to talk, to text. Larissa, will write to me on text after a bad the Trevoha day and just make sure everybody's okay. Roman meets me for coffee in Kyiv when he's there, and I bounce off ideas off him. So I think that's really important because go ahead.
Could I
first
say that,
jump in.
Whoops. I used to look at the various commanders of Operation Unifier and think, wow, every one of them looks like he's been briefed by the previous person, he or she, and they kind of take it on from there. I wish diplomats could be like that, and it looks like we're finally learning.
Yeah, very, very, very good point. But where was I going with that? So I think it is not an easy time, right? So I'm not going to gloss over that. So we did, Larissa had the really tough decision of having to close the embassy, which I don't envy her because we have what's called duty of care as the ambassador. So all ambassadors out there have what's called duty of care. And you're a lawyer, right? So you understand. Basically, I'm responsible and I'm accountable for the Canadians who live there and the locally engaged staff while they're working. So in peace times, not a big deal, but when there's a war going on, you actually have to make decisions on behalf of the team. So, I was listening to the leadership, that's an important part of that. So I don't know if anyone's really aware of that. But if there was going to be another attack or something, I have to carry that decision on my shoulders on what we're going to do and how we're going to react. And I think Yuri Krivosheya said that very well. Sometimes you just have to make a decision, right? And then it's important to make the decision. You don't have time to go, should I do this? Should I do that? You make a decision with the information you have. But the embassy team is a great one. So we have about 25 Canadian-based staff and about 50 locally engaged staff. It's a fantastic professional team that really looks out for Canada's interest And Canada's interest right now is all about our relationship and our friendship with Ukraine, and how do we support that.
You know, maybe Pan Roman, you can tell us a little bit about, what's your life like? Like how many days are you in Ukraine, and then coming back to Canada, and then, how do you maintain resiliency and a sense of purpose while serving in a war zone?
And with not quite as many of the belt and braces options as the embassy. The embassy is under greater risk, but it also has resources that, let's say, a technical assistance project doesn't have. I in fact, that leads you to have to make decisions. So, for example, in February of 2022, I was told by our donors, the EBRD, okay, well, sorry, can't do anything for your team. We might be able to put you in one of our vans and take you away. I thought, well, that will be a fantastic example for my team. Bye. Have a good life. So I went about it a slightly different way. I did end up evacuating, but so did a number of them. It meant trying to find ways for funding people while they were underway looking for a safer place, and then coordinating a return back to Ukraine. So it's, basically you have to have a fundamentally optimistic view of life to be able to put up with this. If you're easily discouraged, it's not the right place to be. And generally speaking, I think, as Catherine pointed out in her presentation, if you do set out a positive goal, you will find things start aligning to help you achieve it. I had mentioned before that I had that quote from Ukrainian Facebook about, it's not yet time to lie down in your in the freshly dug grave yet. On the business side, today the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development approved 8 projects worth a total of $1.3 billion for Ukraine. Business development, community development, and all that. So, stay focused on that. Stay focused on on the things we have some control over. Final note, be adaptable. You'd think, what could be less useful to a country at war than an institution designed to take a very formal approach to treating business complaints through a formal complaints mechanism? So we recognize that. And for 6 months after the war broke out, we just became a universal free legal aid and business advice center for Ukrainian business. You've lost your suppliers, we'll help you. I said to people, forget about what your formal title is. We're looking at what kind of skill sets do we have? What can we do? And let's do it. Let's just offer it to people. And that's what we did for 6 months until things stabilized, and we kind of then went back into our more formal mode. So it's a matter of being willing to reformat and adapt to what's happening, but staying focused on your stakeholders. Who are you trying to help? Real business. Help people do stuff. Help people survive and then thrive.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador Natalka, you mentioned about your predecessor and the incredibly difficult decision that she had to make to close the embassy. But maybe if you can share with us about and of course this is a tricky question, but what kinds of difficult decisions have you had to make, and maybe the process or that you went through during your tenure?
Well, friend, one thing I want to clarify, because the newspaper got it wrong. I didn't close the embassy a few weeks ago. I just asked people to work from home. So I think that's important, because I had a lot of people ask me even in the conference, so it must be really bad if you close the embassy. So it's those kinds of decisions. So I just want to explain what that was. So we have the alerts, as Les had described. But we also have some information in terms of what could potentially be about to be launched, right? And so given that it was traffic time, and given that I didn't want people, because most people live on the left bank and they have to cross that bridge, I didn't want anybody crossing that bridge in traffic, so I said, just stay at home. So that's just explained to people, that was that decision, but we are still operating, we are still working at the embassy. But those are the kind of decisions in terms of safety, security, that we have to make. I think the bigger part of my job is relationship building. I really think that's important. I know what our priorities are. I'd like to think that I influence those priorities. So I use my judgment on when I use whisper diplomacy. I don't have to be known for all the good ideas out there, but I know who to whisper in whose ear just to say, hey, that would be a good idea. You should think about that, and have that sort of telephone tag spread around. And then it comes back to you, hey, I heard this great idea. And I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. So that's good. You don't have to own all the ideas, but you use whisper diplomacy when you think that's going to be the best way of getting something out there that needs to be done. Someone mentioned that about, influencing the government's decisions and so on. But I also need to use my voice when I need to as well. And I'm not scared to do that. So I have the privilege of being at a lot of meetings, and so I do speak up. Sometimes there's, whether it's to the Ukrainian government, whether it's to my government, whether it's to another ambassador, I do take that opportunity. And this year it's going to be very important because Canada is taking the G7 presidency. And so in Ukraine, I will be leading the group that's and Roman did previously. So I'll be getting some tips there. But basically it's the G7 ambassadors with the EU ambassador we meet. But then I'm the voice that would communicate the position of those ambassadors with the government. And it's a group that actually has influence with the government of Ukraine. We meet every week. We meet with the Ukrainian government. And so this is going to be a very important year for us to shape that position. And really the group was formed in 2015 as a G7 mandate to help and advise Ukraine on its reform agenda. So Ukraine determines its reform agenda, but we support and advise on how that could be done using the various tools that each of us have. And what I mean by tools, so it's whether it's funding tools, whether it's policy tools, whether it's bringing or encouraging certain ministers to come at certain times to have that influence, or encouraging a Ukrainian minister to go to Canada, for example. So those are some of the very sexy diplomacy tools that we have.
It just seems like it's obviously a very dynamic atmosphere, very dynamic environment. And I think, sort of touching back on the point even that Yuri made in his discussion, it sounds like the decisions that you make, you take the information that's available and you make a decision, and you can't necessarily say, hindsight is 20/20, and so you want to you take the best decision you can, and that sounds like what you're doing. So we appreciate the difficult job that you have, and it's great for us to learn more about it. So thank you for sharing that.
I'd say Ukraine is one of those places where sort of old-time diplomacy still prevails. In other words, people say, come on, what's the use of all these diplomats and embassies? It's all on the internet, it's all in social media. Well, no, it isn't. And certainly not your ability to shape events isn't. Or secondly, they'll say, well, all you really need to do is to read Treasury Board Mandate 12.3 and implement it throughout your logic model, etc. In a war zone, it doesn't happen. So that's where the person of the ambassador, the knowledge of the local context, the ability to speak the local language, both literally and figuratively, becomes very important. Because I think one of the things that Natalka does, and we were sort of like trial versions trying to be her before she became her, it is also to use the Canada-Ukraine connection and also some of our cultural sensibilities to be able to pitch messages to Ukrainians in a way that actually resonates with them. Because, like putting up another slide of a stick figure doing something doesn't generally resonate, but when you put it in a culturally appropriate context, then it does suddenly.
Let's address, the issue of the relationship and the diaspora and what. Tell us about your role in that, and how does that? Are you all the time in Ukraine, or are you? Tell us about the influence that you can have.
So I describe myself as the ambassador of Canadians, not Canada specifically. So I take that space and I try to really make connections that includes two organizations. And of recent, I've talked a lot about the really fantastic work that Ukrainian Canadians being the big group there. So whether it's the Canadian Ukraine Foundation, whether it's Maria Aid, who's sitting over there. And there's other examples too, but whether it's, meeting up Dr. Antovich's medical group that comes and takes their time and takes risk to themselves to come to do some of these surgeries. I think it's to promote that, and it's to help them as well as they're, trying to help them with their connections where I can, or put people together. So General Dallaire was just in Ukraine, so I'm now working, how do we set that up? How do we make sort of the vet care, Canada's system, or Canada's advice, or Canada's lessons learned be applicable and useful to Ukraine, for example. So those are just some examples, but you're always looking for Canada's value added, or Canada's value strengths, or certain people that, in this room, for example, if you know that they're doing such and such a project or that work, you make those connections to help them be successful in their project, because the projects we're just describing, like those in this room, they are really for the benefit of Ukraine. So I will do what I can to encourage that. So I think that's really, really, really critical in terms of, and I have my own pet project. So and we all should. I think you make a better ambassador if you have something that you believe in personally. And for me, it has been a lot of working with the women's movements and women's rights, and I think that the leadership that women are taking in Ukraine is incredible and is not getting the attention it should. They're stepping into roles that for them are not traditional, but they're taking up that space. So someone's talking about, training women in big machinery for farm equipment. Women in Canada, that happens, but in Ukraine, that's less frequent, but they are taking up those positions. Women sappers. So Miria is like teaching or helping women sappers take that space. And it's a very dangerous occupation, but women are good at it and they're doing it. I've met many women snipers. They're fantastic. So, we lose sight of that. And I think when we're thinking about the defenders of Ukraine, it really is men and women. And we cannot forget that. Women are dying for this cause as well. And at some point, maybe after we've had our conversation, maybe we could do a minute of silence for the defenders of Ukraine, because they are sacrificing their lives. I know I'm speaking to a room that knows that, but it's very difficult for the families and friends. And again, I know I'm speaking to a room that knows that, but it's on my mind all the time. And so it's always knowing that what they're doing and what they're sacrificing, what could I do to help in their work as well? So that so I think that's why I focused on the vet care. That's why I focus on the training, focus on the mentoring, and when you hear about the kind of equipment they need, how do I message that back to Canada? Say, hey, that would be a great donation.
There's so many threads. We could really speak for such a long time, and I really appreciate how you raise the role of women in Ukraine, And let's have a round of applause for the women in Ukraine. So and this is not the segue right now, but I do want to mention that our next speaker is an incredibly talented woman from Ukraine who you're going to have the opportunity to listen to and really pay attention to. And her, Christina's project is all about mental health. And so I want to touch on that now. And so maybe, Pan Roman, if you can share, what do you do for your mental health, but for your team's mental health as well, and those who you come into contact with who are in your circle of influence?
So we've done things like stress management training, first aid training, basically various techniques that allow you, again, to sort of take charge of something around you if and when things become more extreme. You don't want to be in that helpless victim pose. And again, just to feed people sort of a positive story a week or two, celebrate successes, even if they're fairly small successes, they're interim successes, counteract the negativity. And for me, it also means limiting and adjusting the dose of tragic material that I choose to view. I do not watch every single super catastrophic, sad video that's out there on the internet because I just know that it will sap my will to do something the next day. And for me, that's more important than the emotional experience of watching something that maybe might change my life, but maybe not for the better. So I think, people have different approaches to managing this. Mine is to focus on the positive, be aware of the negative, but limit your dose because you don't want to undercut your ability to keep doing useful things.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice that we can all take here, even limiting our dosage, and because we can
doom scrolling.
Yes, we can get it can take us away from our focus and our job, our duty, and I'd like to speak a little bit or ask you about memorable encounters that you've had. I remember so my pet project, if you will, is trauma therapy for children. It's something that I've spearheaded since 2015. And Pan Roman, when you were ambassador, you were instrumental in helping us to get that started with the Local Initiatives Fund. So thank you so much. But when I visited Ukraine in 2017 to visit a children's camp, and I interviewed the children, that was my memorable experience. Maybe you could share a little bit about one or two of your memorable experiences that have happened maybe with one of your side projects.
Yeah, there's many, and I tried to post about them as well because I try to make my social media post to balance off the doom and gloom, because I think that what I get upset about is that you can get the impression that Ukraine is completely destroyed when you watch the news, and that just is not the case. The people are staying, they're building communities, they're opening businesses. Small and medium enterprises are still being opened all the time. And I think that communities are really remarkable in Ukraine. They stand up for. I think Ukraine would not have been in the place that it is now if it were not for that. In the first few days, everyone organized themselves. I mean, the way Yuri described it was very accurate. I mean, from what I heard, I wasn't there, but from what I understand, people created defense units. They used their networks so a lot of what Katarina had described, that was happening in Ukraine. People were organizing themselves, getting what they needed, and they were unbeatable. So, I mean, I think Ukraine is more united than ever. But in terms of individual people, I mean, I think I mentioned it just now, but it was when I met a young sniper woman who she was sitting in Superhuman Center getting fitted for a prosthetic. So she was sitting there. She lost her leg, and I asked if I could talk to her. She was 22. She is 22, and I just wanted to know who she is and so on. And so I asked her why did she do this? Women don't need to join, but she joined because she has a 2-year-old son, and she said she doesn't want her son to fight, and she said she has the personality to do this. She's strong, and she's there. And I asked her, should women be conscripted? She said, no, but make space for them when they do join. So not something, people like to talk about, but there's still challenges for women in the armed forces, and they're doing a lot to overcome that culturally, but she said, make space for women. They are very competent. Give them, if they feel that they can do that, give them the space to do that. So she's somebody that will always stay with me. And I meet with returned prisoners of war. I meet with people who are returning from Russia who had been detained, who were tortured. I meet with parents whose children are still being kept in Russia. I meet with them when they return. I make a point of listening as long as they need so that they can tell their story if they want to. If not, then we joke around. So I will be whoever they need at that moment if they want to meet with me. Most do. Most want to tell the story. Most want to be heard. For me, it was tough because when I was sitting in the room with the returned prisoners of war, it dawned on me that these are boys because I have a 25-year-old son. I'm staring at, and I asked them pointedly, how old are you? Where's your mama? And for me, it grounded me that this could be me. This could be me and my son. That could be my son. And so I relate to them very differently when I look at them as that could be my child. But they're remarkable. They're remarkable. And I always ask the question, what are you going to do next? They say, I have to go back. I have to go back to the front. After I'm better, I'll take the time to heal, but I'm going back. And there's that strong sense. So when someone talks about Ukrainian resiliency, that's what I think of. But they will also be the first to tell you, we didn't ask to be resilient. We have to be. We have no choice. And so that sticks with me too.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to have an avant-dernière question and then a final question for the two of you. But you've just touched on something incredibly strong, which is the young men and women who are going and sacrificing themselves. So let's give a round of applause just to acknowledge that.
If I may add, but I think we also need to understand that the average age of the soldier right now is 46. So let's not lose sight of that either.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for these are very important things for us to be reminded of, to know, and thank you for sharing, how it impacts you, and also sharing those stories of people. So for being their voice on their behalf. Now, I want to ask you something because it's difficult what you do, and I follow you on social media. And
thank you.
And I've seen, so I want you to address this one thing. I've seen some critique or criticism of you because you smile on, and so could you address that?
Yes, so I had, no surprise, I get targeted in social media, and one of them almost had me feel ashamed. And so I was targeted because I put a picture of in there like, how dare you smile? People in Ukraine are being slaughtered and you're smiling. How dare you? Should be ashamed of yourself. You're a terrible representative. They should replace you. And I did for a second feel shame, and then I stopped and went, whoa, no, don't react to it that way. So I wrote a bit of a response to that. And I said, I'll tell you why I smile. I'm smiling with Ukrainians. I'm smiling because of all of the wonderful things that they do. I support them. I wear designer Ukraine outfits and jewelry to support their economy. Ukrainians are out. They are out and they're supporting their economy because there is no tourism. And the war effort is being funded by Ukraine's economy. So people are going out to dinner, buying Ukrainian products. They are supporting the war economy for Ukraine to be able to defend themselves. That's what I think is often missed. It looks like because you'll have newspapers or foreign newspapers say, oh, how dare, look at all these Ukrainians going out, how dare they should be ashamed of themselves. No, they're doing this. And I've also heard soldiers say, the fact that they can go out means we're doing our job. So, it's all about perspective. And before you judge, stop to think. It's a lesson to all of us. All of our moms taught us that, right? Before you judge, try to imagine why. Or ask why. There might be a very good reason why. And so that's why I smile.
I think
Yes, that deserves a round of applause.
those reactions, which are sort of performative social media reactions, are also ahistorical. We're sitting here at the Albany Club, very steeped in history and tradition. There's Sir John A. in the corner there. But the fact is, Canada went through 2 world wars and the Korean War. At no point did people stop putting on theater productions. At no point did people in Canada or the US stop making movies. In fact, wartime is a time when people need entertainment. They need something to distract them from the ongoing tragedy. Some of the greatest comedy movies of all time came out during wartime. So I think people have forgotten. We're used to war as far-off tragedy in super exotic places where people don't make movies. Ukraine is a developed country that has a whole infrastructure, a cultural infrastructure, the opera. Theaters are packed. It takes months to get a ticket now for many Kyiv productions, precisely because people need to let off steam. They need to think about something other than what drone flew by their apartment the night before. So it's all part of that balance, that resilience that's there. And just, my encounters are not half as dramatic as Natalka's. They're more on the business side. But, you asked previously about my team. When you deal with complaints all the time, you can get a bit discouraged. So one of the things we've done is we've restarted a fairly intense program of visits to the regions to our clients. And so 2 of my young female lawyers were getting a bit discouraged. I could see their mood. But then we went and visited 3 clients and 3 big companies, and they saw that behind the kind of the paperwork they were dealing with are hundreds of people, 2 very impressive female plant managers, and that thanks to their efforts of going through dreary tax paperwork, these hundreds of people were working, and they were making stuff. They were making Zirkova bottles, right? They're making particle board. I met the Generalny Director, sitting in the Rivne. He looks at me and says, "Ви звучите пластун з Канади." And I go, "How's that?" And he goes, "No, я сам пласті." So you meet people and you see the actual impact of even the bureaucratic stuff you do. It all has real world impact. And so making that connection is really important to ensuring that you understand what the sense is of what you're doing, and that helps you then also maintain that balance in life.
And I had to add something, because another criticism that you'll hear is if you travel at all in Ukraine, oh, it's war tourism, it's war tourism. People forget that that's actually our job, to travel and meet. And it means a lot to Ukrainians that you've left Kyiv and that you've actually visited. That's how I met and became friends with Alexander Prokudin, who was the head of the regional administration of Kherson, who was here. He's now left. He was very happy with his visit here. But I went to Kherson, and you know, it means a lot when diplomats actually go to some of these difficult places, because we're supposed to represent Canada throughout Ukraine and then report back on what's happening throughout Ukraine back to Canada. So if we just sit in the safety of Kyiv, we had a very skewed view. Did I say safety? It's not like in quotations. So I think that's another myth buster that needs to happen.
Well, thank you for sharing these perspectives, and really perspective was a word that you used, Ambassador Natalka, and I think that's very important. Last question now, and you can each comment on that, and really thank you to everyone for your indulgence, because, you know, we've gone over a little bit of time. We've got one more speaker, and but okay, so there's some young people here in the audience, and then there's parents, there's you know, people who know other people. So maybe what advice can you give for someone who wants to enter into the diplomatic world?
These days it means also bone up on math. With the kind of tests they have these days, I would never get in at this point. But no, if you're interested in the world and you have a knack for empathy and listening. Now, you may think from tonight that I only talk, but I also occasionally listen. Active listening is a key part of this. So empathy, active listening, a genuine interest in other people and cultures, then yes, this is something you should do.
So I was talking to someone about this. So there is you can look up and apply for the Foreign Service exam. Roman did it. I did not. I'm actually not a Foreign Service officer. I was working at Public Service Procurement Canada. So I'm a bit of an oddball in terms of being in this position. But I did work at Global Affairs. But I think a lot of people I know that were able to work there usually got a contract first. If they didn't take the Foreign Service officer route, there are other ways that you can still work or be related. And also, I mean, I'd like to point out that there's different streams of diplomacy, right? So it's there's the political stream, economic. You could become a trade commissioner. You can work in the immigration section, consular section. There's security as well. So that's another things that if you're interested in this world, there's a variety of ways that you can be a diplomat and work. But I also like to do a shout out to implementing partner work. So we fund organization that work in the field, and they do really good work too. So I think that's also a very a way to be able to support in real ways through these organizations and projects.
Okay, well, that's a wrap. The fire is going to be dying down soon, and so we want to thank both of you, Pan Roman, Ambassador Natalka, for participating and really sharing with us. So thank you.